This is the only bit of text that I'm going to give you, so hang in there. This is just taken directly from the executive summary from that GISC website, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that they talk about there in terms of Web 2 technology are being deployed. And remember, this is in the UK, this one's referring to. They are being used, in particular in higher education institutions, but the key things are that they're not being used in a systematic way. They're actually not being used to drive a particular pedagogy or a particular approach. So, Chad, I'm going to stop talking in a minute because I noticed that your hand's up and you'd like to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. Could you flick back, say, 2 slides to the slide that you had the student at the centre and the more engagement? Yeah, that's it. The question that I have, and what I'm finding really interesting about the Web 2 environment and one of the differences, I guess, is that it seems to me with a lot of these applications, the student being at the centre, the question of student identity seems to be a lot more foregrounded, so that if you've got a lot more interactivity, responsibility, accountability, then what you get on, for instance, social networking sites is a lot more focus on individual people's identities. It's like, you know, publish you sort of thing, and that's great and potentially problematic, but what I find interesting is that that's different to a traditional teaching and learning environment, the way I see it, where the student's identity and particularly the relationship to the institutional environment is not as foregrounded and not quite as intense, I guess. I was just wondering if you're interested in that at all or anything you have to say about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jad. I mean, that's an interesting comment to make because I think there is a different relationship between the student, the teacher, and the institution when you start moving into these types of environments, because these environments are much more distributed. So if you, I guess I would summarize certainly the Web 2 type of environment as distributed, collaborative, and cooperative. And that's not necessarily what we've traditionally done with students or the types of environment, learning environment and assessment environment that we've encouraged students to be able to develop in and be successful at. So there's actually an interesting issue here about students as well, whether students will automatically be able to flourish in these types of environments when you look at the types of things that they've done to get to, say, a higher education institution and the types of environments that they've had to be able to compete in. And the types of things that they were told would label them as a successful person. So we also need to think about that. But really, this is an open discussion about where we actually want to go with education, both in the school sector and in the post-school sectors. So I'm not sure whether anyone else wants to make any comments on that before we move on. Okay, Linda.
Hi everyone. I just wrote in the column where you write stuff that I wondered about the competitive aspect of this, because if you've got opportunity, responsibility, accountability, and so on, sometimes what I'm finding is that students tend to be looking at this from a competitive point of view as well, where they have to be better than someone else in order to get the better grade. And yet we're at the same time caught in a bit of tension here between groups needing to function as groups to work together to get what they need done in terms of teaching. That's fairly pivotal. I train teachers, so that's partly what my job is doing. And so I wonder, therefore, how Web 2 is contributing to the kind of tensions that are happening between what's happening in university education anyway, when we're supposed to be assessing individually, but at the same time, we're also pushing a kind of group and interactivity-based learning.
Okay, thanks, Linda. I mean, I think that was an interesting point. And I'll just pick up on the last, just a short phrase I think you said in there, that we're supposed to assess individually. And I think that is actually at the crux of some of the issues. Because do we actually have, the question I will ask is, do we have to actually assess individually? Or can we assess so that we understand the level of contribution that individuals make? Because I think there's a distinction there. And I think our whole assessment regime at the moment has been designed around assessing students as individuals rather than assessing their individual capabilities. And that's because at the moment it's easier to isolate the individual and say, well, if we assess the individual, we can be assured of what their individual capabilities are. But I think there's a bigger issue there, and certainly we should be much more sophisticated in the way in which we can go about assessments so that we can actually assess individual capability development, even if the activity is a group activity or a joint activity. But having said that, I'm not trying to imply here that everything we get students to do has to be a Web 2 activity, and neither does it have to be a group activity. I think there's a range or a continuum of things that we need to do. It's going to depend on the discipline. It's going to depend on the outcomes that are required for the particular disciplines or the particular professional practice. But certainly the types of things that are on this slide that we're talking about here are the types of things that students would be carrying with them when they go out into the workforce. So I'm not sure whether anyone wants to make any comments about that. Okay, if people are writing down comments in the text, so what I'm going to do with a lot of those comments is after this, not only will we archive this, but we will actually extract out some of those statements and comments and questions that people have asked and actually put them up in the blog as well. So we've got a blog for transforming assessment, and what we're going to do with each of these webinars is to take out some of those comments that people have made so we can continue the conversation and capture that as well. So if you're writing things in there, don't think that they're all going to be lost. We're going to capture those and we're going to use them as well. And if we don't get to a particular statement or comment or question that you've put down there, don't worry. Today we'll take that out and put that in the blog, and then we'll contact everyone and let them know. Or Matthew's just put up the URL for the blog, but let people know when those questions are up there and when those statements are up there and how we're going to continue that conversation. So the slide that I've just put up now is one that I think is another thing that we need to think about. That is, we need to set assessment tasks that are actually worth doing. Again, a lot of the assessment tasks that we set students are for the purposes of getting a grade or for the purposes of saying, have they learned X, Y, or Z? And there's nothing wrong with that in terms of saying, have they learned X, Y, or Z? But if we actually expect students to take assessment seriously, not just because the grade is going to determine whether they can go on to the next level or whether they graduate from an institution, but because the actual task actually had inherent meaning, it actually had inherent worth. So we need to start thinking about setting types of problems for students that are actually worth setting, that is actually worth their time doing this, because it actually draws on everything that they've been able to do. And the task can actually have meaning as well, beyond just getting a mark for a particular course. So I guess I'm being a bit provocative here, but I'm doing that deliberately and actually saying that if students can answer any of your questions just by simply copying from the web, then you're actually asking the wrong question. The problem is not with the students. The problem is with the question. Because if you ask a question where you can just copy the answer, then fine. The easiest way of giving you the answer you want is just copy and give it back to you. Because that's the message that we're actually sending to students, that if we ask a question where it can be answered by copying, then what's wrong with doing that? Second point